Hello everybody and welcome to another of my painting videos here. We're going to tackle obviously some object source lighting. It's going to be done with our oils. The figure at hand, this is from Diwali, and we'll throw a link to their Patreon and such in the description so that you can check that out more easily. We painted this one on the Twitch channel, and ever since then I thought it would be kind of neat to do just a kind of very specific video on this thing. Now we are going to be utilizing, like I said, our oil paints here. Now among those oil paints are going to be some paints that we made ourselves, and we used these in a previous video also on the channel here. We took these Green Stuff World Fluorescent powders, we mixed them with some linseed oil, really simple process, and we didn't just create fluorescent paints. Somehow we managed to make fluorescent paints that were also opaque, which I never thought I'd ever say that. That's really nifty, and obviously we're going to get into these two. We're just going to be using some of our, right here, some of our synthetic brushes, a couple of just craft brushes right here. Look at this. Royal Langnickel, I think that might be a more universally available brand right there. This is something that I get from Hobby Lobby. I think a pack of 12 of these is around $5. Get these sometimes in packs of 30. Different sizes. Now these, you could use these Princeton Velvet Touch. You could also use, I think, Cotman. I mean, you've seen me use those Cotman blue handle brushes before. Those are from Winsor Newton. But these have been pretty darn durable, especially the liner brushes here. And again, we'll talk about those more when we get into it. Now over here on the palette, I still have to add my white over here, but think of this as what we call our opaque alley, which I guess it gets an extension now with these fluorescent paints. So white's going to go here. We got our brilliant yellow pale here, a little bit of cadmium yellow deep right there, and that is the non-cadmium version. Again, the price is the same. For me, the only reason I like it there is because it will dry at the same rate as everything else on the palette, which is kind of neat. Got a little Terra Rosa over there, Fanchon Red right here. These three over here, the usuals of indigo, our black spinel, Van Dyke brown. Along the bottom here, we got ourselves some Indian yellow. This is the pearline black, a very dark green, a little bit of Prussian blue. Over here, we got some asphaltum that is from Gamlin. And again, these three right here, these are the homemade fluorescent paints. We'll get into how we utilize those. First thing we are going to do, though, is something we call the pre-glaze, where we put a whole bunch of our darker colors on here, and then we wipe them away with some makeup sponges. Now here I've already cut some of these up. It's essentially I think this is a latex-free sponge, and we'll go more specifically into this because there's different types, and like I said, we'll cover that. Something you might want to think about as you're trying to get some of those sponges and other things that we like to use here. This is just a Badger Steiner Res primer that we brushed on. I think it was this one, and I think it's the Elf Flesh or Light Flesh. That's what it's called. Just a little mix of the two. It's just supposed to be a little bit on the lighter side and also kind of a more of a neutral type thing. You could use a light gray if you wanted. Even that would work as well. But what we want to do next, we're going to get to that pre-glaze, and it's kind of a multi-phase sort of a thing because, well, we also want to establish our object source lighting too. So what we're going to do next, a little bit of that pre-glaze. As we're just about to get into that pre-glaze here, I did want to show some of the other elements of the army that these guys are going to be in. This is my Moria army, and think of it as sort of an off-camera light source. It's not like they're on lava bases or they have little fires on the bases. It's more like what you saw in the movie, that sort of overall, there's this yellowish orange glow from beneath everything, just kind of how Moria was. And we did a video recently, and that's on the YouTube channel. We'll also put a link to that in the description, of painting some of the regular GW Moria Goblins. And yes, we've done a couple of these trolls already, but you could see how again, the whole thing is it's coming from underneath. And it does make it a little bit different than, say, something like, well, here we've got some of our done lendings where the light source, you can see it. It's right here in frund of you. A little different approach, and in some ways it's kind of easy when the light source is just right there. You just, okay, good to go. Now these are also from Diwali, and oh, look at, we're going to be showing you how to paint these too. And the whole idea is, again, that sort of off-camera light source from above. You don't really see it very much, do you? Not very much, but from below, different story. And we need to establish that here. Now, I'm not even going to bother putting my white out there yet because I don't really need it. What I do need is one of these craft brushes right here. Again, the bristles, you can see they're pretty beat up, right? What do we need on the top of this guy? We need, well, cooler colors for one thing. Colors that are also more grayed down. That means colors that aren't super saturated. Let's get into some of these, which means, oh, something like maybe a Van Dyke brown. It's a little bit of that black spinel and even a touch of indigo. Let's pop that right over here. Now, I've got these, the bases here are made with just some simple bulletin board cork and, of course, our Green Stuff World texture rollers. This is the Dwarven texture roller, as you might imagine. And some Sculpey clay. I've got a ton of videos showing how to do these. We've even done bases like this on the Twitch channel. I've got a whole bunch of them on the YouTube channel here. And obviously dozens of basing videos on the Patreon page. So there's plenty of other things that explain that. We won't get into that too much here. All right, so it's a little bit more of an indigo there. This is actually more of a brownish color right here. It all is going to look just dark. People will say, like, well, that's just black. What color black are you using? It's like, not really, because this right here is that perline black, which is actually a very dark green. However, well, it pretty much just looks like black right now. But when we wipe this away with those makeup sponges, that is going to change significantly. But this is part of that. It's not just, doesn't just have to be darker. It's got to be a different color temperature. If this, I guess even if this was a warm green, you'd still have enough color difference, but it wouldn't be anywhere near quite the dramatic difference of this much cooler green. Now I'm letting a little bit of this indigo work its way in there. Sometimes it's not unusual for me to refer to the perline black as indigo green, because indigo is essentially a really, really, really dark blue. There's another thing. The reason why we're utilizing some of these same colors here, the black spinel, the Van Dyke brown, indigo, perline black, they've got something in common, something we call staining property. So the heck does that mean? It means that as I put this on here, when I go to wipe this away, well, a little bit more of it's going to stay on the miniature than, say, your average earth tone, like a yellow ochre or an umber, especially something like a raw umber, or some of your different blues, like an ultramarine blue or cobalt blue. You can put those on here, and you go to hit it with a sponge, and they're just gone. They just disappear. It's like they were never there. These, and you're going to see it pretty darn soon here, when these get wiped away, well, it's you're going to say, huh, wait a minute. That really left something behind. You can also see this is something I'm doing maybe a little bit different than a couple of years ago, where maybe I would have used a little bit more of my thinner, and we'll get into that more, I think, later on. Not quite as important right now to talk about that. Here, let me get a little bit more of the Van Dyke brown here, and that's just about good enough. Sponge time. Now, we showed these, right? There's a couple of different kinds. I didn't realize there was, not being a super expert in makeup sponges, didn't realize you got two very different kinds. Now look at this. See how that's very spongy and crumbly? Well, I didn't know there was a difference. Apparently this is the latex-free sponge. Notice, not crumbly, not spongy. What can happen is that this will flake off and that gets on your miniature, which is probably not ideal. This right here, not going to do that. And also we can cut it into all these little pieces right here. A few advantages of doing this. First of all, these bigger pieces work really well on these large areas. Also, too, so I can turn this over, get a second shot out of it. They're not expensive, but when you can make each sponge into 7, 8, 9 smaller sponges, you're saving a little bit of time and money. I mean, a little bit. It's nothing super expensive or anything like that. But look at that, and you can see the difference between these two. Also, too, the sponge ends up being a couple different sizes. These smaller pieces of sponge, sometimes they're more helpful to get into these smaller areas. He's relatively large, so probably not that much of an issue. Let's see, let's grab another. What the heck, we'll go with another one of these larger ones. Now, this was printed out on a Frozen Sonic Mini 4K as opposed to the Elegoo Mars, which, well, it suffered screen death and all other kinds of things that are kind of common with an older printer. See, as we wipe away more of this, more of the, as we call it, the pre-glaze is taken away. Now let's go after the base itself. And, okay, look at this. Again, these are your, what we would call staining colors right here, the perline black and other such things. Now, the colors we're about to use will have a little bit less of a staining property too. I'm just going to get this thing out of the way. And what's nice about having the cheap brushes like that is that, well, we have lots of them. So now I can take a whole different brush. What we are going to do is we're going to take some of this Fanchon Red. Now I will have to add a little bit more of the liquid to this because we got some rougher surfaces to work on here. As in all of our basing material here. So let's make sure that we get this down in all of the depth areas. Like so. Yeah. So I would like to do just sort of a series of videos here on the various Moria armies. It's not just the Moria, it's also all your Khazad-dûm, right? All your dwarfs. All of your little dwarf units there. Khazad Guard and, oh gosh. There's like dwarf rangers. There's so many things in that list. It's amazing. I did not realize there were that many different choices. You have Hearthguard and my goodness. You just King's Champion, all that. Okay, here, let's start to add just a smidge of our warmer colors here from underneath where we think they're going to go. Oh, what the heck? We'll just put a little bit of this on his hand. It doesn't have to be exact. I mean, you can see how much I fret over, staying within the lines. We're really worried about it. We're super concerned. And I think that's about it. Now, the other thing you can do, let's say you'd like to have that pre-glaze, not maybe wipe away quite so easy or remain behind a little bit more. You could use, or you could just let it sit there for a little while longer. Beyond 10 minutes really won't make any difference. If it hasn't secured itself after 5, 10, 15 minutes, you could leave it on there for hours. It'll dry, but it's not really going to do much good otherwise. Okay, good enough. Back to some sponges here. And like I said, I could let this stay here a little bit longer. It'll absorb it a little more, but it's really not that important now. As far as absorption goes, there is a difference between materials. Now, the cork and the Sculpey, those are relatively absorbent materials. Say a plastic miniature, a metal miniature, a resin miniature, well, those are not absorbent. So you're also going to find that your pre-glaze will wipe away more readily from those surfaces. Now, I don't know if it's just a thing with the Soraya Smoky Black resin for printing, but that really absorbs the paint very nicely. With the oils, I think I could just paint the oils on here without even priming it. I'm still determined at one point just to give it a shot just to see what happens. But that's how well the paint sticks to it. Other resins, I mean, there's so many different types. I haven't tried many of those, so I am not even going to postulate, won't even guess, but something tells me that they're relatively absorbent. I know other folks have told me the same thing, and most of them don't use the resin that I use. So I kind of take that to be a bit of a universal thing. So again, there's a little bit of a hint of some of that warmer tone here, but it's also darker. Without dark, you have no light whatsoever. Other thing too with the oils, usually it's best to have more than one figure to work on, or maybe one really big figure or something like that, because it's you almost have to slow yourself down, because the oils kind of speed you up because you're getting all excited about the wet blending and it covers so much easier and everything. But sometimes you got to slow that process down because you want the paint to just have a chance to kind of sit there. We call it proving. Okay, so look at all these very messy sponges now. This is a little something we call film noir here, and this is important. Check this out. We're going to kill all of the color saturation. You notice here that, okay, yeah, there's a little bit of a lighting effect, but nowhere near what there was. And back here, it's like, whoa, what happened to everything? That is the difference between the color temperature, color intensity. Like right here, there's even less because there's barely any of the fluorescent oranges and reds on here. But here, let's go back to our color intensity. I mean, look at this. This all of a sudden looks a whole lot lighter than this. It's really not that much lighter. It's a more saturated color and it's a warmer color, desaturated cooler. So what we've got to do now is we're going to start to establish the object source lighting as quickly as we can. It's always the first thing. Instead of superimposing it afterwards, we put it on first. So establishing the object source lighting, that's what we're going to do next. To establish that object source lighting, we're going to get into again some of our, maybe a little bit of the thinner into that too. This is our homemade fluorescent oil paint here, and I'm not joking when I say that the shock of this was to find out how opaque it is. Like this coverage right here, that really doesn't happen with any of the other fluorescent oil paints or fluorescent acrylic paints either. Just doesn't happen. I'm just never cease to be amazed by that. With the oil paints, it's always just key to have less paint on the brush. Less is more, and pretty much more is always going to be way too much. We don't have to put every last little micro detail into this. The most important thing is work your way around the miniature. I used to, remember we talked about the whole superimposing the effect kind of after the fact. That's how we originally did the object source lighting, until I realized, wow, yeah, I just spent a whole lot of time painting stuff that now I'm just basically repainting. I'm painting over the top of something. Didn't need to do that. I could have just painted the object source lighting part right away and said, oh yeah, I don't need to really do all the other stuff here. So again, we're just, look at this, we're kind of taking the brush, working it from underneath here. Very little paint on that brush. Why is it sticking? Because, well, there's a bunch of wet paint on here. That's because some folks will say, well, what about a zenithal? So you can do a zenithal if you want. I mean, have at it. You do what you want. It's your figure, your way. However, you're just going to end up painting over that. Here, like this orange, it's actively mixing with all of that green that's there. Yeah, we're basically getting super intense, crazy bright orange to, for all intents and purposes, wet blend with kind of a dingy greenish gray. That really doesn't happen with zenithal priming. And of course, this was just brush on, I just brushed on this primer here. I have an airbrush. I even have videos on the channel here about airbrushing on primer and doing other stuff with the airbrush, but this is just one miniature. There was really no reason to break out the airbrush just to prime one figure. and it works just fine. No thinning of the primer, no nothing like that. Just went in there and brushed it on. And that Stynylrez really does the trick. Now here again, I'm just trying to kind of catch this lighting from beneath. We might take some of this away, but the other end of the brush is getting darker. Why is that happening? It's happening because it's mixing with all of the green that's here, which means I have to kind of come back here and we got to get some fresh paint. Of course, this is essentially some of the darkest orange that we're doing. We haven't gotten anywhere near our lighter colors yet. No need to. But one of the other things I try to show sometimes with the videos is that, boy, even after maybe a half an hour or whatever, you might end up with something where you say, good enough. You can let the oils dry too and then go back and work on it. You can let the oils dry and then do acrylics over the top of them if you want. I've done it both ways. Get something that's acrylic, you let those dry, you do oils over the top, and vice versa. Oils dry, it's just paint. You paint over it with acrylics or oils, your choice. Not a big deal. And also too, we don't use a whole lot of thinner, and we're not really, you don't see me cleaning the brush all the time. That is much more of an acrylic sort of a thing. Now let's see if I do, I just say, I really want to maybe get some of the paint out of this brush here. Just take a paper towel and I'll do this. And that gets a good portion of the paint out of the brush. What's nice though is, let's see, the bristles are dry, as opposed to, well, we put a whole bunch of liquid in there and then we're going to go try and do a dry brush with it. I mean, how does that work with acrylics? Doesn't necessarily work all that great. That's certainly not going to work with the oil paints either. So here we're kind of going to our next, I do believe this is the light orange here. The surfaces that are metal, I usually try to get those a little bit lighter. Essentially that it's a more reflective surface than the skin or this cloth or whatever. So again, all we want to do here is set up this lighting, and it's not just doing this stuff that's lighter. We also have to come back in with some darks. We said it in the beginning. You must have dark if you want to have anything that's lighter. Just like this, that darker reddish whatever color, that had to go in there first. It had to go in there first. Otherwise, I mean, we could make this as light as we wanted. I've seen people that say, but his cloak is white or whatever is white, and that's why their object source lighting looks like object source shading. And I'll say, well, wear a white t-shirt, take a flashlight, go into a darker room, and just see how light your shirt is in that darkened room when it's now illuminated by that flashlight or whatever. It's going to, all of a sudden your white shirt is going to look more like a dark gray. So observation. Sometimes little observation goes a long way. And we'll probably fool around with the film noir, as we like to call it, where we just sort of kill the color a couple of times, especially on something like this. I think that's pretty important. Okay, so we started to get some of the lighter color in here, but we talked about the darks. So look here, you can see on his different parts of the skin tone there that it's not just the orange that generates that light. What we're going to try and do here is take some of that same perline black. That's the dark green. Maybe a smidge of the Van Dyke brown here. And again, just pretty much a dry brush here. And that's what we're going to do, is try and build back in some of the darker tones. Some shadows here and there. It's all part of establishing that lighter tone. We have to have the dark if we want to have the light, because we're going to come back into this with lighter colors for all of these upper surfaces too. Let's make sure we get his arm here. Some shadows this way too. On his foot there. I think here too. And there might be some areas where I look at it and go, I guess we could maybe use some lighting here or lighting over there. Now, I only have, let's see if this one has enough light. Yeah, that one, you can use like a little flashlight or something like that, little LED lights. You could shine those on the miniature too. And some of them actually have a little bit of a color to them. Usually red, green, white, and blue. Those are the typical little LED light colors that you see. I've used those on the Twitch channel every so often, just again to show folks a handy little tool that could work to just sort of basically plan out where your light, maybe where that should hit or not hit. All right, some of the darks here. Let's see what happens if we do this. See, by making that dark, hopefully the object source lighting there stands out a bit more. Now let's get the asphaltum over here, a little bit of the fanchon red. And there's some areas here like this. Well, the light's coming from below. We almost need a bit of more of a shadow of that here. So by making this darker, see, that starts to look lighter instead of just immediately taking lighter and lighter and lighter colors. Same thing here. Again, the light's coming from underneath. For the most part, some of it is coming from the sides. I know that in the previous video, well, let's just say sometimes you have to use a little bit of imagination, and sometimes you just have to say, well, I want this effect. And also too, it's a cave troll, so there's a little bit of suspended disbelief, or whatever the term is. Here's a little bit more of the brown right here. Some of the black spinel. Mostly underneath troll layer. I think we'll also get some more dark along the top of that. Gosh, I almost called it a lance. Probably not really what it is. I forget what it is in the normal rule description. Only ever had a chance to play with the cave trolls one time so far. And again, we're just trying to establish our darks here. We started to play with our lighter tones. See, the darker this gets, the lighter everything else gets, and we can still go a lot lighter. And let's see if we can here, a little bit of our yellow, mix that with the orange here. And you can see we can only get basically a couple of brush strokes out of that before we have to say, okay, time to go back and get some more, because well, every single brush stroke, it is mixing with what's already there. Every single brush stroke, it's wanting to mix. So, okay. Here, let's get back to some of our orange up here. And like we were saying, sometimes you just have to move on to a different area. The paint doesn't want to stick there. You just say, all right, we'll give that 15, 20 minutes, maybe an hour, and we'll just go over to another spot on the miniature, work over there. You'd be amazed. I do it on stream all the time. I'll say, oh, look, here's an area that we've been waiting to work on for a couple hours. And I'll put some paint there, and it just sticks so easily, so immediately. An area that was being a little bit troublesome, all of a sudden, paint sticks no problem. Why? Because for all intents and purposes, we didn't let it dry. We just let it kind of sit there and get set, almost like plaster in a way, or green stuff. When you mess around with green stuff right after you put it on there, it is super sticky, and you could just breathe on it and mess it up. But after a half an hour, it might still feel a little bit soft, but it's set. It's not cured, but it has set a little bit. Think of that same sort of process happening with your oils there. I know for some of you, this is kind of a new thing. Maybe you've never seen this before. I would recommend that you just check out some of the other videos, because we've got many videos here on the channel showing the oils. I mean, not like there's no shortage of acrylic videos either. There's plenty of those. In fact, there's still a vast preponderance of acrylic videos on the channel here. Okay, and we will just, over the course of this, talk about some of the other advantages of the oils. The advantages are that they're actually a lot more durable. So when it comes to painting gaming figures, well, if you're worried about paint coming off because of handling or gameplay or whatever, well, oils is one good way to make sure that paint stays on there. And you can just use, once the oils are dry, I just use the same Army Painter anti-shine that I would use on any acrylic painted miniature. No difference. None whatsoever. Once it dries, it's paint, and that's it. Not many of the oil colors that I use are actually shiny when they dry. Sometimes reds can be that way, but don't really use much in the way of red outside of the Fanchon red. And these homemade fluorescent paints certainly dry very matte, because they're starting out as a powder, so they are definitely going to dry nice and matte. So again, we're going to let this have a chance to set. What we have to do next now is start to work on the rest of his skin tone and the flow here, sort of get the ambient light colors, kind of what you see here. Right here, we'll have almost about the same position as our reference over there. That's why I put these here. So next up, we're going to try and get some of our cooler, more grayed down colors, get those on the rest of his skin, and we're going to do that next. Start to work in some of these lighter ambient colors that we were talking about. Get a little bit of that brilliant yellow pale. And we've got some of our perline black here. Once again, a dry brush. Less is more. More is always going to be way too much. But see how that sort of blends together? Look at that. No layers, right? This is a much lighter color. We're not, that's the big difference when people are first starting to work with the oils. That can be the one thing that's hard for them to keep in mind, is that you don't have to work so hard with all those layers. No. Am I working hard here? Look at how this is also changing color. It's starting to interact with all that perline black, which is a very dark, cooler green. We also, remember, put some indigo in there. But it's that same sort of a dry brush type of effect here. Doing that dry brush. And remember I was saying, well, hopefully maybe after a half an hour you got something that people could say, well, okay, I can just at least put that out on the table. We'll finish it off later, or something like that. That's what I mean about all of a sudden you go, wow, there's something going on here. So instead of a whole bunch of layers and base coating and glazing and all this other sort of stuff, maybe you circumvent all those steps. Less steps. But look how dark that is. See that? Means we have to come back over here. We got to get some more of that. But it's important not to pile up too much paint here. That's one of the reasons we're doing the whole dry brush thing. You use a bigger brush like this, especially for these earlier steps, you're just less likely to be putting on too much paint. And this is by no means the lightest color we can have on here. We could certainly go lighter than this, but just like we didn't want to go too light with all of our object source lighting effects too soon, we don't want to do the same thing when it comes to kind of our ambient light here. And what's ambient light? It's just, I don't know, whatever light might be coming down to whatever holes there are in the chambers. I know there was plenty of things where light filtered into more because not a lot of electricity in Middle Earth, so I had to find a way to get the sun in there somehow. Okay, we'll keep going at a little bit more of our light over here. So look at how much that darker color gets picked up. It means I have to go back over here and again get some fresh color there. And it really doesn't take long to start to see, it's like, wow, man, there's something going on here. I'm starting to get some values, starting to get some shapes. Maybe now I will grab some of that. It's just my white. Nothing unusual about that. But before we get too much on him, it's time to go down here and we'll grab that same color. And now our floor. All that Van Dyke brown, the black spin out, that's going to start to mix with this lighter color. Again, you can see it mixing on that brush right there. Let's do some over on this end. And what that does, just brings out some of the texture of our base right here. And again, just bulletin board cork and the Sculpey. Taking the Green Stuff World texture roller and basically rolling the Sculpey, then baking it. So we end up with a sheet of it. And then we can break that into little pieces and really make it work with whatever the footprint of the miniature is. I'm going to get a little more of the ambient light into that. So again, we're just trying to establish big shapes here. Starting to look a whole lot more like this guy, isn't it? Starting to look much more like him. Without a whole lot of effort. Again, not a lot of extra glazing. And you can do as much or as little. I always just call it, you can get a little bit more development in it. You say, all right, I want to have all kinds of freehand spots and stuff like that on his skin. Well, it's you can do that. You want to add that, all up to you. I just want to think about what we want to do here with our steel. Just kind of using the side of the brush here. All I want to do is just get the paint positioned down here. That's all I'm looking to do. See that? Light coming down from this side. I don't know. The handle of this might still have to just end up being darker. Got the chains there. We also have his cuffs right here, which is going to have to, it's going to have a combination of some of our cooler light colors and some of the fire as well, or our off-camera fire anyways. And I'm going to grab some of my lighter color here. Start to pull out things, his cheekbones, eyebrow ridges. You notice I'm not even trying to blend it right now. I can come back into this with what I always call a blending brush. And all it is just basically a soft brush that has no paint on it. I'm just going to throw that lighter color in there. What do we mean by a blending brush? Again, just something that has no paint on it. I think this has got no paint on it here. A softer brush. And see this sort of scumbling brush stroke that we're doing? So it almost, it's almost going to look like it was airbrushed on there. See, again, it's just going to take those lighter colors, like this big old blob right here. Turns that into a nice smooth shape in no time. This is where the time savings comes in. If we were to be doing layer after layer after layer of acrylics, well, we'd have to do each and every one of those layers painstakingly. Here we just we bypass all that. Just going to bypass all those layers, get right down to it. Which is why after, essentially about a half an hour or so, we've got all of this, and this is a cave troll. This is not a little goblin or something like that. This is a cave troll. Now, granted, it is a really, really, really nice, very clean sculpt and cast of a print. Sorry, not a cast. As someone who's had to deal with metal miniatures and resin miniatures and all kinds of stuff for many years, the 3D printing stuff really, really is exciting, and some of the stuff that I don't have to deal with anymore. And you want to spend 8 to 10 hours painting something like this guy? Well, have at it. Again, it's your miniature, your way. But I know that for some folks, maybe they've got some time constraints. That's why I try to make these videos more like, whether it's a Patreon video or this or whatever, something more like what your actual painting time might be like. You probably don't paint 10, 12, 14, 16 hours a day like I do. Guessing that doesn't happen. Maybe you get a couple hours. So if the video is a couple hours long or thereabouts, you can get a decent sense of what you can get done in those couple of hours. So if you're wondering why they tend to be around somewhere between 100 to 120 minutes long, that is why. I'm trying to keep it to the most common, basically working time of a typical person doing the miniature painting. who's not not necessarily doing it for a living. But see, we'll be able to really add some of our lighter tone. Well, we can go back the other way too. So again, we're going to grab our another one of our liner brushes here. Let me see, is this my 10-0? Here it is. So liner brushes versus things like a spotter brush. So boom. Well, classic spotter brush. Well, not just the bristles here. Since these bristles are longer, they actually hold more paint. So many more advantages there. Also, too, this brush has taken a beating. I mean, this thing has been used for weeks and weeks and weeks, and this has barely been used, and it shows an awful lot of wear and tear after just a few uses. That really does not happen to the liner brushes. I need to start to think about some darker colors in here too. A few areas also on these cuffs right here. So we've got those kind of vertical shapes. That's what we need to do on these guys. And even, see, I can put a little more thinner in here. I don't want to put too much in. As soon as you have a whole ton of thinner on that brush, that's one of the reasons why people sometimes have paint that gets removed from a figure. Because, well, it is, I mean, the thinner does remove paint. I mean, it'll do that. Especially if you use too much of it. Here, let's get a little bit more of our dark in there. Now here, I'm going to grab a little bit more of my perline black, mix it with this Van Dyke brown right here. And that is more of your classic pin line wash. But you see we're not brushing that on, we're just sort of touching the brush to it. And see how it just kind of falls down into the crevices there. That's your capillary action. We'll just let it do its own capillary action there. I know that can sometimes be a little nerve-wracking for folks that are more used to controlling every aspect of the flow of the paint. But here, we're going to let it do some more of its own thing. A little bit dark there. And then maybe some of these little, never really understood what all the little barnacle things were about here, but that's what's on your cave trolls. Let's get a little bit more of the dark into his mouth right here. So maybe some more of the Van Dyke brown, something that's got a little bit warmer. Well, I have to give him some teeth, of course. I have to give him some teeth. And then now some of the little barnacle things, we'll also probably catch some light onto those. And I'm going to take a look at his head right here. We also did throw in a little bit of warmer greens in just a couple of places on him too. So here I felt like I needed to darken that down a little bit more. That's also, again, more of our greenish color there. Back to some of the indigo here. Acts as, again, not just a dark next to a light, but that cooler blue, essentially next to the orange. That's that color contrast, that's that temperature contrast. Really important. I think we could probably use some darks down here. Yeah, take some of that same color here, get that, so he's got, oh, he does have 4 fingers, okay. I think that might be one difference between the Diwali trolls and the or more official version, where I think they only have 3 fingers. Now I'm just going to take a look at, okay, that's what's missing there. I see something is missing, and that's a little bit of our fluorescent orange right here. I know there's something, just wasn't quite looking the same. We're just missing some of that. Now we are using our thinner, which now here in the US, it's really easy for me to get it's Speedball is the main name on it. Mona Lisa is kind of the sub-brand. If you're overseas, I know people that have used the MIG Ammo odorless thinner and the AK Interactive even. I've never used the AK stuff. I have used the MIG Ammo. In fact, you can find videos on the channel here where I'm using the MIG Ammo thinner. So I've certainly used that. To me, well, it's easier to get the Speedball stuff. It's certainly way less expensive. And I think it's even a little bit gentler on the paint as well. But sometimes the best ability is availability, and whatever's available in your area, well, that's what you're going to have to use. Okay, I'm going to, again, this is not the lightest orange here. What I'm starting to think about now is some of these more precise, I guess you would say, areas where we want our lighting to be located. This base is a little bit different than our other one. So maybe let's say, okay, here, maybe the light is more blocked. Maybe the light is less blocked over here. So a bit more of our orange here. I need to see where some of this is at before I come back into some of my more ambient type colors. But what we'll do next is we're going to start working on some of I guess, highlights in general on the skin also. Trying to get some lighter things on this weapon here on both sides, whether it's the cooler colors or these warmer colors like this. And we're just, again, maybe, I'm just trying to think, okay, maybe the light just kind of sneaks past this area here and we get a little bit more illumination on these barnacles. I know, somehow the term barnacle is just sort of stuck in my mind here. And once we start to put our lighter colors, kind of the ambient light colors on that, these won't, at least in terms of just the value difference, the light and dark difference, not going to be quite so pronounced. Not quite as pronounced as they are right now. So again, would I spend a bunch more time on this? Of course I would. But we're trying to keep this again in that certain time frame. You know what? I think I will let a little bit more of the orange get to this. Make a little bit of a change right here. Saying, you know what? I mean, with the floor not really being there, I think maybe more of our light could reach that. Let's see, we have to decide. And I'm going to decide that maybe maybe this amount of the lighting from underneath reach this far up. Maybe not there. I guess we could get a little bit of our object source lighting on his toes there. Okay. You know what? I think we'll let a little of the orange light work its way on some of those muscles too. Okay, what we'll do next is we're gonna, lighter colors on his face and some of the more regular highlights on things like the metal, and just kind of go from there. This is where we start to tighten things up a little bit, right? Just a little bit here, a little bit there. So let's get to some of these lighter colors and a little more detail. Let's do that next. Let's see what kind of lighter colors we can add to our metals and some other surfaces like that. And what we're thinking about is some of these edges here. Now, maybe it's time to bring some of these out. We're not just going to do simple edge highlights. We're looking to do more than that. See, we kind of got it larger there, and so it sort of gets reduced in size once we start to move it back a little bit. Here, we're going to grab one of those blending brushes that we've talked about. That was just a little too big, too much. Take some of it away. Nice and easy. And again, we're letting that mix with what's already here. And even here, so see that kind of goes from light to dark there. Kind of alternating a bit. Here, let's also make that just a smidge lighter right there. That should probably be not just one solid block of darker color there. Then we've got his cuffs over here and some of the chains that we're going to need to lighten up a bit. That's probably going to get hit by some of our orange, so we'll leave that. We're going to probably need a line or a bit of an edge along the top right here as well. But you notice, again, it's a bit of a broken line there. It's not completely just one continuous line of highlights. Might even let a little bit of the brilliant yellow pale work its way into this too. Get our light along the top here. And remember, we don't want to forget about our orange glow from underneath there either. So just kind of showing you what we have here. We're also going to try and work in maybe some of the Prussian blue, some of the indigo. We're kind of adding the lighter tones, but we're also going to be adding some darker tones, some shadows as well. Right now, I'm just trying to locate all the different areas that might need to be lightened up. I am just going to take some of this brilliant yellow pale here. See if we can't maybe just give him some eyes. Not going to bother with all the, doing the pupil / iris stuff just yet. We'll just wanted to get something there, and then we've got some of the interior teeth. It's a little bit easier for me to see some of my other highlighter is if I know at least, well, okay, how light are the eyes? We also are going to want to get some greenish colors on the skin tone as well. And that's a bit of a warmer green, not all just this same color. We could do some brownish colors in there. There's a lot of different things that we could do. We are not restricted. I'm just going to, again, take a little quick look at this. All right, so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take some of this asphaltum over here and take some of the brilliant yellow pale. This is actually something that I use for, it's kind of a darker skin tone. And when I get into my Corsairs of Umbar, we'll be using certainly a lot of the asphaltum to create some skin tones, asphaltum and the brilliant yellow pale. That's sort of a ruddier, tanned skin color. But you see how look at it, I just have to push this along. Look at that. Is there a bunch of layers there? Nah, not a bunch of layers. See, a little bit different here. Let's maybe use some of that on his clothes, I guess, as you might call these. Most of that is again is just going to be getting some of the orange. Let's see. We're talking about that indigo for some of the darker tones. Well, let's mess with that here. See, and a little bit of that here. So it's almost like some striations of light, dark, light. That is very much what happens on metal surfaces. References, always handy. And on Instagram, there's so many different armor folks that are walking around with actual armor and swords and shields and weapons. And it's always really wild to see what the actual thing looks like. Now, where's that little spotter brush that was so messed up? We can use this kind of as a micro blending brush here. See how we just got that line there? See how we're just kind of taking the edge of that and see how that gets nice and soft all of a sudden? So any brush can be a blending brush. Not kidding. Anything can be. Now I'm going to try and bring in some of my lighter oranges here. I'm just going to move this guy out of the way. He's kind of getting in the way there, or into harm's way, I guess I should say. So we're also starting to think about maybe some lighter yellowish oranges in some places. Might even let a little bit of the brilliant yellow pale work its way into this too. Maybe to add just a tiny bit more opacity to it. Here we go. So I'm looking to get some lights down here. That's what we're looking for. But that had to be a little bit thinner because, of course, the thin paint will stick to the thicker paint and vice versa. What we had there was reasonably thick paint. Also, too, that paint had been, well, we talked about letting it cure for a little bit, right? It's kind of sitting in the proving drawer. But conversely now that we have added all this much thinner paint here, well, what does that mean? It means our next layer probably going to have to be a much thicker paint to get the same kind of adhesion and coverage. And again, we're just looking to try and create edges along this. So we're going to lighten this up right here. But then let that sort of fade into like where his hand. I don't want it to be that light right where his hand is. I want it to be that light here, mostly because it's being sort of held out over the edge of the, what would you want to say, the edge of the floor here. Let's see if we can also throw a couple of lights there. I'm looking at this chain that also could use, see this, a couple of edge highlights here. There we go. I was like, I know there was more of the chain on this other side. Now this has pretty much none of our orange, so I'm going to have to backtrack here. And again, we're going to add a couple of these little striations of orange here. Now maybe we try to lighten some of this up. Maybe even throw a bit of maybe some kind of light edge on the bottom of this. Now that's got just too much yellow, not enough orange in it. Definitely want to go with more of an orange to your fiery glow. If it's too yellow, I mean, even a candle glow is really not a yellow glow. You want it to be more of an orange. Let's see if we can get another part of our edge right along this side of the handle. And now we'll just let that, again, sit there. We can come back with a blending brush later on. Now here, I need to actually kind of go in the other direction with some darks on the tile floor here. That's almost more of a pin line wash right here. See how that just kind of, there's just enough liquid to make that flow. Every color is a little bit different. Some colors just take a lot more to make the paint flow like that, and others take not much at all. Usually the more translucent an oil paint is, and that's something we talk about all the time. Some oil paints are opaque, and there's not many of those. Usually things like, well, titanium, they're white. The cadmium colors, the brilliant yellow pale. Well, the brilliant yellow pale has white in it. So unless it has some kind of white in it, with a few rare exceptions, Terra Rosa is one of those, it's not really going to be terribly opaque. Most oil paints are some form of semi-transparent or semi-opaque. And it's generally your lighter colors that are going to be more opaque. Your darker colors, some of those can be some of the most translucent colors. And I think that catches people by surprise sometimes. They're not really expecting that. They're thinking, oh, it's a dark color, it's going to cover. And it's then they get the opposite. And that really surprises them. So just something to kind of keep an eye on. Okay, we've really started to fetch in some darks there on some of our metals. Wait, is that like there's lots and lots of metals on here? There's not all that much. Okay, here's our indigo, actually mixing that into some of the skin color almost. Little reflected light here. That's subtle, not a whole bunch. Let's get a little bit of the bluish color out here. And blue is relative. It's bluish compared to everything else. And that gives us that extra little bit of, again, a contrast to all of the orange. Now we've got to get some of our lighter metal colors up here on his collar. Pretty much not going to have any of the orange up here. How the heck is it going to get up there? So not too much of that. Let's see, what did we do on this one here? So we probably going to want to get some of our reflected light here on the sides of this, and also we've got the studs that are in there. Here, let's lighten this up down here a little bit more. Okay, not too much. And sometimes I'll go back and just simplify things. I thought something was a good idea, and I said, it just doesn't read very well. It kind of looks weird, and sometimes I just go and say, okay, we're just going to wipe that part out. Doesn't really add very much. It makes the shape more confusing. So one of the things we'll be doing in our next step is to kind of highlight or get some lighter stuff going on the skin tone, those barnacles and such, when we add our also that warmer green to it. Just gonna clean out. This is my 18-0 here. See if we can get a decent light there for a kind of a sharp highlight against the skin. Might need to even darken the skin some more, but get a little bit of an edge highlight there for it. Not too much. So yeah, we can refine this as much as we wanted to. Like if this is something that you're doing for a contest or whatever, and you want to spend hours and hours just doing things, it's all up to you. But what we're going to do now is we're going to stop pretty much on the metals here. And then we want to kind of get into the skin tones, I think. Add that warmer skin tone and maybe even try and do a little bit of a freehand on there too with those dots that we were talking about. So here we're just gonna so a couple little lighter edges here, right along, right there at the tip, especially the part that kind of hangs over the edge there. We talked about just catching those little glints of light. That's what's happening there. Okay, so what we want to do is, again, some of the warmer greens that you see on here. And you see we got some of the spots there on his skin. So why don't we get to those next? Let's add some of these warmer greens that we were talking about, and also some of our highlights on things like the barnacles and other whatever. And what we'll do now is we're going to add a little bit of this Indian yellow here to the mix. So it's the same Perylene black, kind of the same brilliant yellow pale, but now we've added that little bit of the Indian yellow. It gives it that tint more towards a warmer green. It's not a huge difference, and it's not going to go absolutely everywhere. But here, I'm going to make sure you can see what we got going here, and we'll start putting that onto some of the, well, our, for lack of a better term, barnacles. I guess, I don't know, scales, is that what you would call them? It's his hide, I don't know. But I don't want to warm this up too much. There's a danger of just going a little bit too far with this, and if we do, we lose out on that kind of cool versus warm difference that's sort of establishing all of our object source lighting. Well, not all of it, but a good portion of it. But this is more just to make the skin tone a little more visually interesting. People won't necessarily look at it and say, aha, there's two very distinct colors of green here. No, they're not really going to do that. They won't notice it that much. I've got plenty of stories about what people notice and what don't notice on your miniatures. There's an awful lot you think they do that they absolutely do not. Or you think they might, but they really don't. So I'm just, again, here and there, a little bit of this warmer green, almost like you would use a like a 5 o'clock shadow or something like that on somebody. We would get some grayish green skin on a person's face. We're going a little bit maybe warmer green on some of the mid-tone areas. Again, gonna let a little bit of that warmer green work its way in there. Not too much. Does not have to be a ton of it. And I think maybe that just got too much of the, yeah, too much of the lighter color in it too from the orange. We'll just work some of that out of it. Now we'll go maybe a little bit lighter. Here's some more of that brilliant yellow pale. And we don't want to, I don't know if I want these to really stand out a lot. I don't want them to end up looking like little gemstones, because you highlight these things too much and before you know it, that's kind of what you have, is what looks like a whole series of gemstones. Having painted a couple of gemstone dragons, maybe that's why I'm a little bit more aware of that. Those are also some videos that are here on the YouTube channel. Those are a bit older, and boy, what do I wish I had oils for when I did those. That would have saved an awful lot of time, to say the least, and probably a whole lot of aggravation too. Now again, with stuff like this, my preference would be to be painting 2 or 3 of these trolls, maybe more, or painting these guys plus more of the little goblins or some other figures, even painting some terrain. I really prefer to have more figures all at the same time, because then I can take advantage of that thing we were talking about where you just let that paint have a chance to sit there. Like all of this down under here, it'd be so much easier for me to be able to work on something else for 20 minutes, half an hour, and then come back to that. That is the one advantage of when I'm doing the live streams, is that I can be working on more than one figure, because the streams are typically several hours long. And I don't do any of the speed ramping things. I don't like the voiceover stuff. I really do want you to see every single brushstroke, instead of the whole magical, oh look, here we are a half an hour later and look what we did. That's not terribly informative. And we're going to just again let a little bit of the different color work its way in here, that kind of warmer green. And we'll use our blending brush. Not too worried about doing that right now, because if we're going to put the some of our free-handed spots and such in there, well, we're going to be using our blending brush to essentially take the edge off of those spots, because when you put them on here, it's painfully obvious that you just put a spot of paint on there. You take that blending brush to it, all of a sudden it just takes the edge off enough so that you have, I don't want to say it looks subcutaneous, but almost a bit more like a tattoo, as opposed to a just, oh look at someone just like glued a spot onto this guy's chest or something, or his head. So again, just looking to get a little variety in the skin tone here. You can certainly see the same thing happened on our other one. I want to see if I can maybe start to get some lighter tones here around his mouth, his nostrils here. And maybe even here around his eyes. Okay, before we get into things like the spot. Okay, now I think I am going to take a blending brush to some of this. So see these hard lines right here? Boom, they are no longer hard lines anymore. And some of the things that, like here on his face, where you can see really obvious brush strokes, not obvious anymore. Those are gone. So see that big old stripe of a brush stroke? Well, that is now been toned down. And just all along the figure here, we can do this. Because I know I've even had people say, well, can you airbrush oil paints? And for so many reasons, you really don't want to do that. Won't I don't even know if it's necessary to go into the reasons why, but it's just not going to work the way you think it's going to. Not going to give you those results, and it's so much easier just to do this. That's kind of the main reason is that would be the very difficult way to approach something that you can do really easily without any of the mess or hassle, just with a regular old brush here. So don't make things more difficult on yourself. The whole point about using the oils is to make things easier. Now this also, we've got some thicker paint on this brush here, because a lot of the stuff we put on there the paint has been thinner. We need to make it thicker. Thin sticks over thick, and now this is the vice versa part where we've got some of the thick looking to have that sticking to the thin. And now I want to see if maybe I can try and give him some kind of eyes here. We're going to take the Indian yellow here. I don't know, maybe even a little bit of the red. I don't want to necessarily just be white here. So actually trying to give that a little bit of a tint to the eye. And I'll let those, again, just kind of hang out for a bit before we try and fool around and do the darker pupils in there. We got other things we can do. We can do this. And catching just a couple of those edges there. Only a few. Too many. We'll call it too much attention to those. Don't want to call that much attention to them. Yeah, these up here on his shoulders, well, they would probably catch a fair amount of that ambient light, so maybe up here, a little different story. And again, here, maybe I've gotten just a little bit more thinner on the, but nah, I guess it's okay. I was thinking for a second that I had maybe more thinner than I really wanted on that brush, but I think we're okay. Get some more here now. And let's think about, before we try and put the, basically his, finalize the eyes, let's see if we can do some of the stuff we were talking about with the spots here. So there's some of them on his head, see that, even a few on his shoulders, but then especially kind of on the belly, you have a few of those, don't you? And what I'll just do is maybe some Van Dyke brown. I don't want to get too much thinner on that. That's almost a little too much thinner there. Here, a little more Van Dyke brown. And we want to kind of alter the size of these things. So some are going to be bigger. And we even sort of change the shape a little bit. And they're not round. Most definitely not round. Maybe even put a couple of those up here. And sometimes things just don't go like none of those are right. Those are all pretty much all horrible. Well, that was an easy fix. That was not hard. And we'll try this again. See if we can get it a little bit better this time. Now, just imagine if that were acrylics. That would have probably been somewhat disappointing. See, right there, that one didn't work out. Not a problem. I love this ability to be able to make these changes. And the other nice thing too is as I put each of these spots on here, remember in the early part of this where we would put on our lighter color and you could, when I pull the brush away and show you, you could see the darker color kind of worked its way in the brush. Well, what's happening here is that the lighter colors are working their way onto the brush and it's lightening that. So with each of these brush strokes that I put on here, in some ways it's fading itself. I don't even have to necessarily work at that to make it faded. Again, having done this so many times with the acrylics, and this just really makes that process so easy. And remember, we can still come back into that and soften it up even more with the use of our blending brush. Maybe just put a couple of these here along his arms, and then we did want to do some on his head, but I think they have to be relatively small. We're also going to start here from this edge. Why? Because we're cheating a little bit. See that little bit of dark right there? All of a sudden it makes that edge stand out a whole lot more, doesn't it? And no one's really going to know that you cleverly position those right there just to try and take advantage of that little lighting phenomenon there. And just like it did on his chest, see, as each of these becomes less and less pronounced, that's because the lighter paint is mixing with the darker paint on the brush. Now, if you don't want that to happen, it's a pretty simple solution. You just go in back to your palette and you take some fresh paint, just like we did with the lighter colors. So, poof, there it is, right? Was that difficult? That really wasn't difficult at all. Kind of hard to make it any easier than that. In fact, it would be difficult to make it any easier. And you don't necessarily have to go berserk with the spots everywhere. Now here I'm putting a little bit of thinner onto that. I'm just tempted to try a couple of here on his face. Maybe make him a little bit different than the other one. Doesn't have to be exactly like it. Believe me, don't be obsessed about, oh my gosh, everything in the army has to be exactly the same color because people will notice. They will not notice. As someone who has been to tournaments and other such things, people are not going to notice if that blue is not exactly the exact same shade of blue in the same spot in every guy in the army. They're not going to notice. Part of it is, well, the lighting in the room is going to be terrible, and they won't be able to see it, even if they wanted to, because all the tournament rooms are pretty much lit by flashlights. I have the story of my Fallschirmjäger army where someone apologized that they did not vote for best painted because they didn't think I had painted the eyeballs. And I kind of thought he was joking, didn't really know how to react. When I saw people who actually knew him kind of doing the face palm thing, that's when I knew he was not joking. He was serious that he didn't think that I had painted the eyeballs on things that had some fairly elaborate freehand. So I hope that doesn't discourage people, but like I said, don't get too rough on yourself there. So we're just gonna take our junky old brush right here, and we're just gonna basically we're gonna poke the troll. We're just gonna do a little bit of a poke here and there, and what that does softens up those edges. If I do something like this, I'm just gonna smear them. This, take the paint away. That's just basically softening each of these little spots right here. But we can't be hasty, and we have to just do these little, basically like this, where we're just kind of touching the brush to it. And what that does is it's going to get rid of those hard edges that are on each of these spots. And we've got to do that up here. Again, just touching the brush to it only enough to basically take the edge off. This works for other freehand too, not just these dots. I mean, you got a banner or whatever, or some kind of freehand like that, it'll do the same. So again, see those dots again act as a bit of a contrast to what's in the metals right there. So what we'll do now with a lot of these major things settled, go try and do some little final details, maybe some things on the floor here, and just odds and ends around here. So we are going to get to some final details again, the floor and other little things that we see, maybe some lighter stuff going on here. I'm also going to just, in between here, I'm going to throw just some black along this line here. That's the edge of the base, so I can tell, well, how much lighter do I need this to be? So we're going to get to our final details, and we're going to do that next. It's time for some of those final details. What I want to see is if I can maybe take some of the lighter yellow / orange here, and maybe right along. So that might be a little too much. It's a little too bright there. So too bright. We're just going to take something like this, make that go away. It's like an eraser. I think that might be a bit more reasonable as far as how much lighter maybe that. And it's just a couple of these edges here just to bring out the shape. That's all I'm looking to do. And if we're going to be doing that up here, we probably should do that here as well. We've done this on all of the other bases that are in the army, so let's keep it consistent here. Now this has again a fair amount of the thinner on it. This stuff, it's been kind of sitting here again, not really drying, but it's been setting. And that means it's going to be a little bit easier for this paint to stick to it. Maybe here we're going to enhance some of the lights on, yeah, on the spear, or no, sorry, on this It's almost more of a pitchfork. I guess more of a trident, really, when you think about it. Okay, we've got that pretty well taken care of. Why don't we get some lighter tones on our base here, and we're going to take the Van Dyke brown and the brilliant yellow pale, and we've got ourselves sort of a warm gray that's happening now. And all I want to do is just bring out a couple of parts of the knotwork pattern here. We don't have to go crazy. Again, this paint is a little bit thicker because we did a little bit of a pin line wash there earlier. I won't make too much of the lighter colors here, well, underneath the troll, because whatever ambient light there is, well, he'd sort of be casting a shadow on this from that ambient light. So again, we won't do too much back there. And this is not a very light color at all. Think of this as sort of a light middle tone. What the heck is a middle tone? That is sort of that halfway between light and dark. It's certainly not a highlight, but not a shadow either. And actually, the vast majority of colors actually fall into that middle tone range. I know most people, they really get drawn into highlights and shadows. I mean, that's great, nothing wrong with those, but there's a whole lot more than just highlights and shadows. If you don't have middle tone, you really don't have either of those things. So there's just a couple of areas trying to add some things to it. Let me see if I can maybe even do some a little bit more with the eyes here. And this eye too. Okay, now he looks like he's actually looking somewhere. All right. I don't know, maybe I'll let a little bit of light work just right on a couple of these things. Again, just to bring those out, make them a little more distinct, and that's it. Not too much more. Now I'm going to go back to some darks here. Oh, just some things like on the chains here. I think we lost a little bit of a couple of these edges here. See, like right there? Yeah. Maybe even here we need just more kind of light and dark striations on that. I'm going to try and clean up that shape a little bit. I think in here is another place where we could use some more of these darks. Again, it'll make the lighter orange stuff, and this is a kind of a indigo with the Van Dyke brown mixed together. The oranges will look lighter kind of by default. Maybe a couple of these could use a bit of a shadow here. Can you do as much or as little as you want? You might have just an hour ago said, good enough. That's it. That's all I need. Because who knows, maybe you're doing a bunch of these. I know I did have some crazy fun with one Moria listed at least three cave trolls in it. It's all up to you. I'm just trying to present a few options for you, that's all. So back to some lighter color there. I'm going to try and get a little bit of the Prussian blue here. Okay. Yeah, just so it's not all kind of that grayish color, some a little bit more. And I think we needed some of those extra little striations in there again to kind of give it that extra bit of a metallic look to it. It's not going to be shiny reflected metal, but there should be some kind of reflections on it. I need to go any darker up there? Nah, not really. So I'll try and throw as many links to different things as I can in the description. I'll throw a link to that other video where we were painting the Moria Goblins. But I try to arrange all these things via playlists as well. So that's another way to try and find stuff. So if you're looking for, well, anything that's Lord of the Rings, look in the Lord of the Rings playlist. If you're looking for something that's oil painting, well, there's an oil painting playlist. I might even create an object source lighting playlist too. I've thought about doing that for a while. So we might do that too, just to make it easier for folks to locate that more specific technique. There's also a basing techniques playlist, and that really dives into so many different techniques and materials. And hopefully this gives you at least some kind of idea how to maybe approach one of these more monstrous type beasts. We did the little tiny goblins. This guy, a little bit bigger, little more complexities going on. But if you want to see more, you can always do the subscribe thing. That'll, I do believe you should be getting alerts when there's new videos posted, which I do very, very frequently. You could also, if you want to go even deeper into the chasm that is some of these techniques, also the Patreon page, where there is, not kidding, somewhere in the neighborhood of about 900 hours worth of content for you to digest. That is no joke. Plenty of army painting tutorials, dark sword tutorials, dioramas, terrain even, because I love me some terrain. Just again, a little bit of maintenance there, smoothing out some things. Maybe like up here, smooth that out just a smidge more. I will throw some pictures of this in the closing credits. I try to get some finished pictures of things, so you can check those out. But you can also just look at my Instagram account. I have lots and lots and lots of pictures of painted things there. Now the video is kind of flying by, so it's a little bit difficult to have pictures in the video of finished miniatures. That doesn't always work so well. It's always kind of hard to see. So there you have it. Here, let's get our previous one here. So that wasn't it. Now he's got himself a little friend to play with. Look at that. Not too shabby and not too long of a time period. So I do want to say thanks again for watching the video here. And if you want to, do the like and subscribe and all that kind of good stuff, that of course is appreciated. And I will catch you on the next episode.